When two opposing fleets clashed during World War II and things started to go wrong for the big ships, it was invariably the little destroyers that would be flung into the breach to save a situation or pick up survivors after catastrophe had struck. There are few better examples of this than HMS Electra, a destroyer that was twice called upon to haul up survivors from capital ships that had met with disaster, and then in the middle of the chaotic Battle of the Java Sea was called on to charge into harm's way to desperately try and save another from destruction. Electra was added to the Royal Navy in September 1934 as the second of 9 E-class destroyers to be completed. She spent the first 2 years of the Second World War stationed around the British Isles, helping to escort convoys and support Britain's main home fleet based at Scapa Flow in the Orkney Islands. In May 1941, Electra joined the escort of the capital ships Prince of Wales and Hood as they hunted for the Bismarck, and was the first ship on the scene after Hood was destroyed in a colossal explosion, picking up the only 3 sailors to survive the sinking. A few months later, Electra was deployed to the Far East, where again the capital ship she was escorting came under terrific attack, as dozens of Japanese aircraft descended on the British ships on December 10th, and both the Prince of Wales and Repulse were smashed to bits. Electra and the other destroyers came in to pick up what survivors they could amidst the carnage. This time, Electra crammed a remarkable 748 men onto her decks before speeding back to the relative safety of Singapore. But within a few short weeks, Japanese troops overran Malaya and threatened Singapore, forcing the remains of force said to seek a new base on Java, where they joined up with American, Dutch and Australian ships in a joint force to try and halt the Japanese advance. But this was a tall order. The Japanese had more ships, more troops and more aircraft. Though the odd success was achieved with courage and skill like the US Navy's destroyer force at Balikpapan, the tide was flowing in only one direction, and by the last days of February 1942 the situation was dire, with Japanese ships now preparing to invade Java. The Joint Allied Command decided to try and intercept this fleet with the ships it had left. A combined striking force under the command of Dutch Admiral Karel Doorman put to sea with a diverse mix of ships centred around the heavy cruisers HMS Exeter and USS Houston. Opposing them was a Japanese fleet under Rear Admiral Takeo Takagi, which had as its centrepiece the heavy cruisers Nachi and Haguro. Many of the ships in both fleets are playable in today's sponsor, War Thunder. War Thunder is a free-to-play vehicle combat game available for free on PCs, consoles and mobile devices. You can take command of over 2,500 detailed tanks, planes, helicopters and ships, ranging from biplanes to fighter jets and much more. War Thunder has a sophisticated damage model to make every engagement feel realistic, as well as featuring a wide variety of game modes to match whatever your favourite way of playing is. Join over 95 million players in epic PvP battles today, and use my links when you sign up to get a massive bonus pack including the exclusive vehicle decorator Eagle of Valor, 100,000 Silver Lions and 7 days of premium account. Available for a limited time for both new and returning players who haven't played for 6 months, so sign up now. On paper there wasn't much to choose between the two sides, but battles aren't fought on paper. Doorman ships came from a variety of nations, each with their own design philosophy and ways of communicating and fighting at sea. The Japanese fleet had trained relentlessly for months together, and had a key advantage at long range despite having the same number of heavy cruisers as the Allies. This was because Houston and Exeter only had 6 large caliber 8-inch guns each. Houston normally had 8, but one of its turrets had been knocked out by an earlier bombing raid. By contrast, the Nachi and Haguro had 10 of these larger guns apiece, giving the Japanese 80% more firepower at longer range. The two fleets sighted each other just after 4 PM on February 27, 1942, with the light cruiser Jintsu firing the first shots at HMS Electra. Before long, both sides' heavy cruisers were in the fight, trading salvos at long range. To make commanding his diverse fleet as simple as possible, Doorman had arranged all of his cruisers in a single line ahead, with his own flagship De Ruyter at the front and the other light cruisers behind Houston. It wasn't ideal, but for nearly an hour Dorman's ragtag fleet held its own. But then, everything started to go wrong. At 5:08, a shell from Haguro struck Exeter amidships, puncturing her armour belt and exploding deep in a boiler room. 6 of the ship's 8 boilers were taken offline and Exeter's main guns lost power. Smoke billowed out, and with no steam pressure to drive her turbines, the cruiser rapidly lost speed. Keen to avoid getting swiftly rear-ended by Houston behind them, Exeter turned sharply away from the enemy. But Houston, struggling to see what was going on through the huge amounts of smoke ahead, guessed that Exeter's turn was something Admiral Dorman had ordered, and they had just missed the signal flag, so they followed the ship in a hard turn away. The 2 light cruisers, Perth and Java, then did the same, and the entire Allied line swung around, leaving poor old Admiral Dorman sailing towards the Japanese fleet on his own. To make things worse, at this moment the Dutch destroyer Courtenay blew up after being struck by a torpedo, adding to the general sense of chaos around the Allied fleet. Closest to the Japanese at this time was the 3 British destroyers, led by Electra's captain, Commander Cecil May. He swung into action to try and restore order, ordering his ships to make smoke and bringing them across the front of the fleet, obscuring the disordered cruiser line from prying eyes. Admiral Dorman soon brought his flagship around to head southeast, but a big gap had opened up between him and the rest of the fleet, with the Japanese now hot on his heels, aiming for a knockout blow while the Allied fleet was disordered. Desperate to buy time to gather his errant cruisers up and enable the maimed Exeter to disengage, Dorman ordered Electra and her sister ship Encounter to mount an immediate counterattack, which meant going through the smoke to fight whatever was on the other side. Responding to these orders, Electra quickly swung around to the northwest and drove on towards the smoke. If the odds gave Commander May cause to hesitate, he did not show it. As Warrant Officer Timothy Kane, who would write a book after the war on his experiences aboard Electra, sums it up, he had accepted his mission, made his decision, and would abide by it until the bitter finish. Electra's life, his own life, meant nothing now. His to attack, to create as much a diversion as he could, then pay the penalty. After a few minutes of gloom, Electra burst through into bright sunlight. She was completely on her own, and faced with the combined strength of 2 Japanese destroyer squadrons, 14 ships in all, as well as the light cruiser Jinsu, whose shot at Electra had started the whole battle off. The shell started quickly in both directions as the range rapidly came down. Despite the odds, it was Electra who struck first, 2 quick hits on Asagumo, one of which hit an engine room and forced it to a halt, smoke pouring out. For a while, Electra seemed to live a charmed life, with shells splashing around it, sending torrents of water across her deck, but not finding their way onto the hull. But eventually, with the sheer weight of fire she was subjected to, her luck ran out. 3 shells struck the destroyer in quick succession. The first hit the bridge, the second wrecked the forward electrics, and the third slammed into the aft boiler room, causing devastation inside and cutting Electra's propulsion. She ground to a halt. The time was 6:16 p.m. On board, Engineer Lieutenant Frank McLeod estimated it would take 30 minutes to get Electra moving again. 30 minutes, stationary in full view of a dozen enemy ships, was a tall order, but McLeod and his men worked away in the depth of the ship, desperately trying to restore power in a smoking boiler room as the shells continued to crash around the ship. Not long after Electra was stopped, the destroyer Minagumo came in close to finish her off, pounding shell after shell into the stricken ship as Electra's gunners did their best to answer back until one by one they were silenced. Warrant Officer Kane, responsible for the ship's torpedoes, launched a salvo to try and trip their assailant up, but to no avail. Before long, the situation was hopeless, and Electra began to steadily list to port, water gushing into her lower deck from shell holes. At some stage, the order to abandon ship was passed around, and the crew began to help wounded sailors into various life rafts and the ship's one remaining boat. But all the while, Electra remained under heavy shell fire, and many of those who went into the water were struck. Gradually, the destroyer grew quiet and its list worsened. One of the last to leave the ship was Warrant Officer Kane. Along with the ship's cook, Harry Gretton, he leapt into the sea and paddled away from the doomed destroyer, just in time to see the captain, Commander May, appear on the upper deck, waving to the crew in the water as Electra began her final dive into the depths. Electra's final charge had been a valiant one. Her sacrifice had given Exeter the time she needed to get away and allowed Dorman to reorganise his fleet to prevent an immediate catastrophe. When she sank, of her crew of 168, 108 were lost. Of the 60 survivors, 54 were rescued by the American submarine S-38 and 6 by a Japanese destroyer after 4 days adrift. Like so many destroyers both before and after, Electra had given everything to try and protect others from harm. But like so many ships that fought and sank in the East Indies, it was in a losing cause. By the time Kane and other rescued survivors arrived back in Surabaya, the Dutch position on Java was near collapse, while the Allied fleet had been crushed. Of all the ships Dorman had commanded, only the 4 American destroyers remained afloat. Though Exeter had escaped the first battle of the Java Sea, she did not escape the second. But that's a story for another video. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks again to War Thunder for sponsoring this video. Don't forget to play for free on PCs, consoles and mobile devices, and use my link to claim your free bonus pack. Available for a limited time only on PC and consoles, so make sure not to miss it.